Hi, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Looks like we still have people joining, so I'm going to give us a few seconds to get settled. Get your cameras turned on, get yourself situated. Okay, let's get started. So good morning. Thanks for joining the Prenatal to 3 Policy Forum today. In order to maximize bandwidth and viewing optimization, microphones and cameras are off for all attendees. For any questions, please input them into the Q&A chat panel. Questions will be moderated by Jane and the team and addressed at the time of Q&A sessions. So before we begin, I do need to disclose that this session is recorded. So again, welcome. And I will pass this over to Dean Campbell to kick us off.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Campbell. I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at the University of St. Thomas. And I'd like to welcome you to the Prenatal to 3 Forum. And while we wish this forum was in person, we're grateful that so many of you have logged on to discuss such an important topic. As a former kindergarten teacher, I had the opportunity to welcome our youngest members in society to the K-12 system, and I saw firsthand the power of early intervention and how children were set up for success prior to entering elementary school. But I also experienced the opposite and recognized that not all children have the same opportunities, which I think we'd all agree isn't okay. And throughout the pandemic, I've reflected on my own time in the classroom and thought about the types of support our educators need. And I feel a sense of urgency because children and their families need our support more than ever. And so I'm excited to attend this forum today and hear from experts discussing early intervention, the preschool development grant, federal legislation, and our state budget implementation. I'd like to thank you all for participating in this forum, and I'm excited to learn about how we can support early childhood in the state of Minnesota. Before I turn it over to our esteemed guest, I do want to share the land acknowledgement at the University of St. Thomas. So the University of St. Thomas occupies the ancestral and current homelands of the Dakota people, Minnesota Machoke. We also recognize the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk, whose lands were colonized by the United States and are currently occupied by the state of Minnesota. We condemn the tools of settler colonialism, including genocide and forced assimilation, undertaken in the name of white supremacy that created structures of injustice and inequity that continue to oppress and marginalize Indigenous and underrepresented peoples. We work towards the process of decolonizing minds and educating students to be morally responsible leaders. We commit to the work of truth-telling and relationship building as we seek new pathways forward as relatives in the University of St. Thomas community, the Indigenous communities, and those who traverse multiple communities. And now I would like to stop and I'd like to welcome our Senator Tina Smith. Thank you, Senator Smith, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dean Campbell, and I'm just so delighted to be with you all. I almost just made the classic Zoom mistake of not unmuting myself, but luckily I remembered. While I am also really sorry that we're not able to join together in person, I'm actually really glad that we're doing this by Zoom because I'm here in Washington this morning. And but for Zoom, I wouldn't be able to join you at all. So it's great to be with you virtually, and I wish I could see you all as well. So I want to just take a couple of minutes and tell you about what we've been working on here in Washington and a little bit of the state of play as we work to move forward the president's big Build Back Better agenda, where childcare and early learning are really at the center of the plans that we've been working on. And I really appreciated Dean Campbell's introduction to this because it just jibes so clearly with what I know and what I've come to understand even better from the literally hundreds of conversations I've had with advocates and legislators like you, and also childcare providers and parents all over the state. So from my perspective, childcare is a family imperative, it is an equity imperative, and it is an economic imperative. We knew this before the COVID pandemic, but I think the COVID pandemic really laid bare the deep underlying structural challenges that we have with childcare. And we can see that our economy won't work, our economy won't get back to normal if we don't make sure that we have safe, affordable, high quality childcare options for people, no matter who they are or no matter where they live. This is crucial in terms of equity because it is how we close gaps in opportunity for kids. And we know that the distinct gaps that we have in Minnesota for Black and Brown and Indigenous children can be addressed so directly and so effectively by making sure that we have good access to childcare. So as I've come to understand it, the problem, and you all know this, the problem is that the whole model, the whole business structure for childcare in this country is not working. First, it's not working for families who find themselves often having to travel long distances, trying to find the childcare that they need. And then when they find that childcare, it is prohibitively expensive, in often cases, as much as sending your child to a year at the University of Minnesota. It's not working for childcare providers who are struggling to make their family providers, in particular, struggling to make their businesses work because of high fixed costs. And you can't just cut costs in childcare because you need to make sure that you've got an environment and a situation that's going to be safe for kids. And it's not working for the providers themselves, who often are women of color, who are making minimal wages, often lower wages than they could be making if they were working at McDonald's. And that is also not completely unacceptable. So we also, I just want to say, have seen through the last 20 months about what happens when parents, especially women, lose access to childcare. It's phenomenal to see how, as people have returned to the workforce, those jobs are being filled much, much more by men than by women, because women do not have the options that they need in order to take care of their kids. 11% lower workforce participation rate for moms of young kids in Minnesota, as an example, according to the research done by the Federal Reserve. So what do we do about this? I want to talk about this just in two packets. The first is the work that we have already done to shore up the existing system and make sure that it stays in place while we go through this really, really challenging time. Congress did that by identifying $50 billion to send out through state organizations in order to shore up childcare. And I can tell you firsthand from my conversations with providers that those dollars have been incredibly helpful in making sure that those businesses could just stay in business. That, though, is a kind of an emergency program, and is as significant as it is, it doesn't do the structural changes that we need. And so that's what we're working on right now in the Build Back Better plan that we are working so hard to come to conclusion on. And I'm fighting really hard to make sure that childcare remains at the center of that program. And what I think that we should do, what we're working on, is a strategy that would say that nobody in this country should pay more than 7% of their income for childcare costs. This is a powerful tool because it is it puts more money into the system. It will allow facilities to raise wages for workers. It makes childcare more affordable, and it can be available in every part of the country. There's a lot of discussion, I just want to say, about how to do that. And as we push on this, I'm going to want to make this as broad-based as possible. I don't want child care to be just a program. I want it to be a program for everybody, and especially middle-class families who are often struggling the most to afford childcare. This is an equity opportunity for us if we get this done right, to make sure that all of our babies have good opportunities to have good access to childcare. And it goes hand in glove with the president's goals to make sure that we have universal access to preschool as well. So I need your help as we advocate for this in the coming days and weeks as we bring these big bills in for a landing. access to childcare that is affordable, that is high quality, that is safe, that is near where you live is fundamental to our economy, to families, to our work around equity. It goes hand in glove with our work also to keep the child tax credit, which is putting more money in it ends up being the largest tax cut for families that we've seen in this country in a generation. And it goes hand in glove with our work to make sure we have good universal access to preschool. So thank you so much, everyone. And I have just a few minutes to take a couple of questions. Dave Pinto, I can see you there on the screen. It's wonderful to see you. I understand that my great staff member, Pete Wyckoff, is the godfather of your children, one of your children. So I'm excited to see you.
That is true, and it's so nice to see you as well. Thanks so much for being here with us. It's a real honor.
So I have a couple minutes, Dave, if people want to ask a question or two. And also I know that Bree Mackey, who's my great staff lead in Minnesota, is on.
How do we best advocate and do who?
So one of our questions, Senator Smith, and delighted that you are here. The question is, how do we best advocate and to whom is one of the questions from the audience.
Great. Well, that's a great question. Now we are if you care about childcare in Minnesota and you think about who we have representing us in the United States Senate, clearly I am a strong advocate. Senator Klobuchar is a very, very strong advocate too. I would also say that we've got strong advocates in Congress, but I would, wherever you all are in Minnesota, whomever your congressional representatives are, don't hesitate to reach out and tell them what a big deal that you think this is, how important you think this is for our economic recovery and for supporting our families. So that is a very, very important thing that you can do. The other thing I would say is that the folks on this call are such experts and strong advocates. So think about ways that you can reach out to people that you know in the business community and in the nonprofit community and others around, in your neighborhoods. This childcare issue has become a very salient issue for businesses around Minnesota for the reasons that we've just been discussing. So, but keeping those connections and those conversations going about the centrality of this is very, very important right now. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. I'm looking at our Q&A. Anyone else, Senator Smith? We are just so grateful for all of your work, and we just are grateful for your time this morning and send you good energy because I know you're working. We know you're working for all Minnesotans, and just can't tell you how much we appreciate your hard work.
Well, thank you so much. I am working hard for those families and those babies that deserve to have the right start in life. And I'm just grateful for all of your advocacy. And we should not, this is a challenge that we can tackle and we can fix. It does not have to be this way. The dislocation and the challenges that families are facing, it does not need to be this way. So with that, I'm gonna sign off. I just so appreciate you all. And take care. Thanks for inviting me.
Very welcome. Thank you. Well, that is lovely. And we are, again, just extremely, extremely grateful. And I want to just say that to the audience, we are going to be returning to the topic of federal legislation a little later in the program. Deb Fitzpatrick will be speaking about that after a set of presentations that we're about to have. A reminder that the Q&A function is the place to put your questions, and you can do that at any time during our morning together, and we'll be monitoring that. So just to say that. And then as one more reminder, which is that the Prenatal to 3 policy forums, which are put together by St. Thomas, Representative Pinto, Representative Lisa Damath, and the Elders for Infants, are quarterly endeavors with 3 goals. And we're trying to share plans, create a common base of knowledge, and build relationships. And we so miss all of you and are so ready to get past Zoom and get back together, but just the way it goes. Our next forum is January 20th. Keep that in mind. And now we're going to dig into a deeper dive about COVID, and in particular, its impacts on Minnesota's families who are pregnant and parenting very young children. Our subject this morning is early intervention, building knowledge in that arena. And we're delighted again to welcome back Dr. Krishnan Subramanian from Hennepin Health. And he will be giving us a developmental pediatrician's perspective on how the pandemic and has impacted screening and early intervention from a doctor's primary care office. So with that, I'll call Dr. Krish to the podium, as we say. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, Jane. Thank you so much. And what an honor to be with you all this morning. An honor to follow Senator Smith. And thank you all for your championing. Hannah, if you don't mind advancing the slide, grateful. And one more. So Daniel Tiger has been a hero for our family during this pandemic, a frequent friend and companion. Baby Margaret modeled the arrival of our newest little one, and Daniel's potty training really has inspired great success. But the adage I take most from Daniel is look to the heroes or look to the helpers. And it provides me a lot of joy because I get to speak today to a lot of helpers, people who have been really throwing yourselves with love in the direction of children. And it is a labor of love that you all are doing. If you don't mind advancing slide, Hannah. However, what we're seeing now is that this gentleman resembles my economics professor. And what we're seeing right now is an incredible increase in the demand for this labor of love, right? We're at a moment where everyone needs that kind of care to a great extent, particularly our little ones and families. And yet supply has become a challenge, and there's a component of burnout, there's a component of being overwhelmed. And it's something we're gonna see throughout this process of the early child referral system. And so that's what I'm gonna talk about a little bit today. Hannah, if you don't mind advancing. The Elders for Infants are my mentors, really people I look up to so deeply. And they came to me and asked a few questions from a primary care pediatrician standpoint. And the question was around, what is the status of developmental screening and referrals? What is the status of, and so as we think about barriers to that, what is the status of well checks? What is the status of insurance? And then what are the screeners, the referral systems and intervention providers saying and hearing? And then finally, can we sort of summarize some of these barriers that exist in the process of screening and intervention provision? And as a part of this, I really am honored because I got to chat with the system of referrals, individuals within that system. So people who are providing services as well as people administering the programs. And so I'm really grateful to those individuals, and we'll highlight them in a moment. If you don't mind scooting forward, Hannah. So Araujo et al. Did a paper late last year, early this year, about a meta-analysis of the mental health ramifications of big things like COVID-19, H1N1, AIDS, Ebola on families. And if you don't mind advancing again, Hannah. So this was the takeaway. The high level of stress that humanity is experiencing as a result of COVID-19 may generate tolerable or toxic stress for children and adolescents, depending on if and how support is ensured. And so this really is a critical moment for all of us to be thinking about how service provision is going forward. This can be toxic stress. This can be adaptive resilience building stress. And so that is up to all of us. If you don't mind advancing, Hannah. So Gassman Pines did an article last year that talked a little bit about these elements. Income loss of job, added caregiving burden, and illness during the COVID pandemic, and what its effects were on parental and child mental health. And if you had any one of these, we saw a decrease in parental mood. If you had any two of these, we saw more sleep quality changes in parents. We saw uncooperative behavior, quote unquote, in children. And then if you had any three of these, we began to see sort of deep anxiety and depression effects on children themselves. So we see that this is a stepwise relationship. The more of these that compound, and we know that many people are experiencing all of these, the greater the effect on small children. If you don't mind advancing, Hannah. So this is a really rough schematic, and I welcome, I know it's rough, but it's a rough schematic of what sort of a screening and referral process look like. And from a family's perspective, you begin by making an appointment, getting a visit, and this is obviously through the medical lens, but you start with an appointment or a concern. You go on to the appropriate screening and surveillance that occurs at a visit. You talk about the referrals that are made, and then finally intake at a service provider. And I'm going to go through each of those steps. And if you don't mind going forward. So one of the questions to address is insurance affecting children and families? And is it preventing them from getting the care they need? We do see up in the top left corner, you see the national child uninsured rate, and you can see it upticking sort of very generally speaking. It's about a 1% increase in the uninsured rate during the pandemic. Up to 10.4% of children were uninsured at some point during this year. We know that there's great inequity in this space. Wealthier kids did better in terms of their insurance status, and kids below the poverty line lost insurance at a greater rate. A couple critical elements. Medicaid disenrollment freeze was crucial. So the provisions made during the pandemic to stop the disenrollment for Medicaid were enormously important. And then one thing we all need to be thinking about is Medicaid re-enrollment for families who have lost jobs. How do we get kids back in Medicaid? And that's something for all of us to be thinking about. I think this illustrates that wealth issue. So the top line is this year's uninsured rate. The bottom, the lighter green is last year's, and you can see our kids who are below the poverty line have a greater uninsurance rate than last year. If you don't mind advancing, Hannah. So one of the questions posed to me is, are well child checks, have we sort of been behind on well child checks? This is one of the healthcare systems in the area provided this data, and that red line just should serve as a metric of a baseline of across these years. The left is 2019, middle is 2020, this is 2021 on the right. Okay, and you can see that yes, in 2020, there was a big dip around March, April, May, June, and it was slow to climb. But by fall of last year, we got back to sort of well child par. And now this year, we're really busy with well child care. We're also really busy with acute care visits, right? So the system is really busy, and it's, I would say that we're back to well child rates. So just not having the visits is no longer the challenge, but you are making up for a lost few months and a backlog on where we were at with children. So if you don't mind advancing, Hannah. So let's go. So that's just getting the visit. Let's go on to the screening and surveillance pieces. Do you mind? Yeah, thank you. So this is last time I was privileged to speak with you all. I talked about all the things we do at a well child care. This is all the things we do. You don't mind advancing, Hannah? As part of the child and teen checkup system. And so it's a lot of things, development being one big component of that. Please advance, Hannah. Thank you. So this is what developmental surveillance and screening look like. So it's eliciting parent concerns, observing children, but it's also doing formal screens, things like the PEDS, the SWIC, previously the Denver, the ASQ, different formal screens for children. Do you mind advancing? So are we doing the right things? I think while we are back to doing visits, we're seeing a lot of kids. We are seeing that we're still behind, right? Like we're still behind on certain metrics, vaccination being a proxy. We're still behind on, this is total vaccination, complete vaccination rate. So are you up to date, catching up to date or not up to date? And we are, this as of 2021, our full vaccination rate is quite a bit less than 2019. So we're still lagging in what all the sort of effective things that we're supposed to be doing. Do you mind advancing, Hannah? And one of the big limiting agents right now in the clinic setting is this, right? We're all really busy taking care of a lot of sick kids. Our personnel is waning. And as you can see from Commissioner Malcolm here, there are fewer healthcare workers on the job than there were last year due to the extreme stress of the pandemic. And this is something I think every clinic is viscerally feeling. And there's, that therein lies the stress in virtually every discipline, and it trickles to every part, including our early childhood screening. Do you mind advancing, Hannah? So clinic takeaways, insurance is an issue. Well child visits are no longer lagging. There's high volume demand and there's a catch-up demand. But there's simultaneous demand in sick visits, a lack of personnel, and we're experiencing significant burnout. You mind? Yep, thank you. So the next is looking at our early childhood systems referrals, and I'm really grateful to Kat Dominga and the folks down at the Department of Education who were really helpful with this piece. If you don't mind advancing, Hyena. Thank you so much. So this has helped me grow. It's one of the first places that many providers, as well as parents and school districts, will refer a child if we're concerned about development. Mind advancing? So this is 2019 referrals. And we can go advance one more. You can see 2020. 2020, we saw a huge dip in the same way that we saw in clinic visits. You're seeing a big dip in our referrals. And then 2021, you can see we are above 2020 levels. Now, I think traditionally we would say, hey, great, we're seeing more referrals to early childhood screening or early childhood intervention. And that is true. The system is still making the commitment to respond within 7 to 10 days. They're doing an enormous amount of work. But you can imagine that the stress on the system with that level of referrals. I think the other thing that Kat wanted to point out, and I think is so important, is that while we're getting more referrals, it doesn't mean that we're doing right by families all the time, right? Are we centering their experience? Are we making equitable, or is this an opportunity to think about our work in equity around referrals and getting kids the right care? And, you know, from a pediatrician's perspective, even the idea of referrals, right, is I'm going to send you out to another place and make another step. So just using a little caveat with that word referrals. So demand, once again, way up. And now we're going to the intake at the service provider. And I want to, if you don't mind advancing, Hyena, thank you. I was really privileged to speak with a couple of service providers. And this is what they're saying, okay? They've exceeded the number of referrals for the past 10 months, since August of last year. And I think that's the data we're seeing, right? There's a catch up from March, April, May, big referral push. Many times you're seeing double the average weekly referrals from previous years. During each spike of COVID, which you see on the right, provider referrals are dropping. However, schools, counties, other mental health agencies, and parents and families are making more referrals. So we're seeing record level referrals, not necessarily from healthcare providers, from the system as a whole. But one concern is that we're seeing an average of 1 year increase in the age of referral. And so it brings out the question that we probably missed a lot of kids in the pandemic, in the early parts of the pandemic, and missed early signs, early referral reasons, and now we're catching kids later than we did before. The questions I pose for myself, are we focusing on other things? Are we focusing on acute care visits? And are these developmental concerns presenting more acutely in schools and with families? There's an 80% increase in demand for mental health services nationwide. And so a huge stress. And then we see that the average wait time for that initial sort of full evaluation across the board has increased. So there is that lag, and this is that supply a demand outpacing the supply. If you don't mind, Hyena, thank you so much. So I'm going to go through each of these steps and just summarize the big key takeaways. From making an appointment and getting visit, well-child checks are happening and we're catching up, but insurance is an issue, particularly for low-income kids, BIPOC kids, and demand may be outweighing personnel capacities. Next. We are still referring from providers at a similar level to before, but we're referring later. We're catching things later. Next. The early childhood system referral, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of referrals, and this is a great thing. We're seeing a wider variety of sources. We're empowering other folks to make those referrals, and that's a great thing. How do we democratize that ability to make referrals and do that well with knowledge? That's a big challenge and question for us. And then finally, at the service provider, we're seeing huge increase for referrals, a wide variety of sources, great things, but a longer time to intake and process as demand is greater than supply. Hyena, if you don't mind advancing one more. I just want to say Kat Dominga and the team at the Department of Ed was amazing for helping me. And I emailed this email address. If you ever have a question on early childhood stuff, email this email address. because they responded like that, and it was amazing. So I'm really grateful to them, and then happy to answer questions later. Thank you so much, everyone. Really grateful to you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Krish. We are grateful for all of your work and for this very helpful perspective on a very urgent situation. Our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Hall-Landy, who is now located in the new Minnesota Institute for the Developing Brain at the University of Minnesota. And she's spoken to us before. Some of you may recall she's the CDC's Act Early Ambassador for Minnesota. She's a psychologist and a researcher in the field of early intervention at the College of Education and Human Development. And today she's going to share some of the research around the impact the COVID pandemic has had on early childhood systems within Minnesota. So welcome, Jen. And again, thanks to our audience. I just want one quick thing I want to say is we have 400 people registered. If we will have a recording of this ready for you. So as you're trying to absorb everything, just know you have a chance to come back and listen again. So thank you and welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Jane, for that nice introduction. And thank you to the Prenatal to 3 Policy Forum for having me back again. I also wanted to thank my previous speakers, Senator Smith and Dr. Krish. It's an honor to go after the two of you. And thank you to everyone in the audience today for coming. So like Jane said, my name is Jennifer Hall-Landy. I work now, today is my first day, not at the University of Minnesota, but the first day at a new center on the University of Minnesota campus, the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain. I took some pictures because I wanted to share with all of you. I don't know how great the pictures are, but we're located on the River Road in Minneapolis. It's a new site, and it's meant to be a hub of innovation for early intervention. We have researchers here that are bench scientists, brain researchers, public health researchers like myself, early intervention, and connecting it all together with policy and connections into the field. And so we're all really excited for this new center. And next slide, please. I'm just going to share a little more about it because I think it really relates a lot to our mission here today. But what we really are looking at, how can young brains build connections for life? And how do we connect that work to better policy? We know, next slide, please. We know that the first 1,000 days of a child's life is a critical time for outreach and brain development. It shows about what research tells us is about 80% of brain development occurs within the first 1,000 days of life. So that's, again, very well aligned with prenatal to 3. That's about 3 years old. So it makes these years critical for lifelong health, learning, and success. So all of us, I believe, share that passion here that we want to make a difference during those critical years. Next slide, please. As Jane said, I lead the Minnesota Act Early project. And what our goal is in the state is for us to promote early developmental milestones, that we're understanding what health, and that we're getting parents and providers to monitor early development and act early if there's a concern. What the research tells us, and it is sound, the earlier we intervene in a child's life, the better their life outcomes. So that is the group that I lead. Next slide, please. It is part of a broader CDC program called Learn the Signs, Act Early. I encourage all of you to go to that website and take a look at all of the free public health materials that are there to support early development in those early years. It's all free. It's meant to be used. There are free books. There are free apps. There's a lot of free trainings. And it really is all converging on this goal of how do we get to kids earlier with supports to support their development. Next slide, please. So what I was brought back here today to talk about more specifically is this past year, we had a project looking at the impact of COVID-19 on early childhood systems. We did many things with this project, and one was we created a report based on stakeholder input. So our Minnesota Act Early team is a group of stakeholders within the early childhood system. So these are stakeholders from all the major state agency systems, from the University of Minnesota, we have parents, we have community leaders. We all come together in one space and talk about the challenges that we're seeing in the early childhood fields, as well as some of the strengths and how we can work to create better programs and policy. So today I'm going to be sharing a lot of what I collected from stakeholders in terms of data that they felt was compelling around the impact of COVID-19 on their systems. Next slide, please. Again, and our goal was to connect across key early childhood systems. I can't say that enough. So many of us in early childhood are all working towards the same goal, yet we don't always connect and we don't always work together. And some of us are a bit siloed by the systems in which we work. We rarely get a space for all of us to be together and to talk about challenges, but then also to talk about innovative, interdisciplinary, interagency, intercommunity solutions. So next slide, please. So that was the goal of our group. So today I am going to highlight some aspects of this report that relate to early screening and referral. The data report is called COVID-19 Impacts on Minnesota Early Childhood Systems. We had a couple goals with this report, and I've sent the full report, and today I'm just going to highlight screening and early intervention. But what we wanted to do was to really develop an understanding across systems, because we know that families, all of us, live across systems, how COVID was impacting that. And you are going to see some of my data is going to intersect with Dr. Krish's, and that's okay. It'll just be another look at that. And again, this is just some select from a broader report. So I'm going to have you move to the next slide, Hyana. Thank you. So Dr. Krish talked a bit about this. This is our Help Me Grow. These stats are from our Help Me Grow partners. This is the early childhood referral and enrollment. And if you take a look at this graph, we see 2010 on the left side moving. This looks a bit like a mountain, that our partners at Help Me Grow were doing a great job. Every year, their number of referrals and connecting kids to systems was growing exponentially. We see a high right around 2019 of 22,764 referrals. And then we have the pandemic hit. We see a significant decline in those number of referrals. And we also, one thing I've seen is, and Dr. Krish talked about it as well, the impact of COVID really highlighted to us the interconnectedness of systems. I'm not sharing the slide today, but a key driver to referrals to Help Me Grow, our pediatrician well baby visits, those were down significantly. So less were coming from that outlet. We look at childcare centers, some of which were closed. They weren't coming from that outlet. And then that impacts the system down the stream. Next slide, please. So this, again, this slide is courtesy, and Dr. Krish was talking about it too, of our partners at the Early Childhood Special Ed Department at Minnesota Department of Education. Kat Dominga and John Von Overen did a wonderful job collecting the data. How were the early childhood special education systems impacted by these lower referrals? And if we take a look, and this was a snapshot of child count data, what we were seeing was a 15% drop in early childhood special education overall, birth to 5. Part C, which serves the little ones, birth through 3, had a 20% drop in enrollment during the pandemic. Part B, those older kids, 3 to 5, 12% drop, a 12% drop in pre-K school readiness programs, a 9% drop in kindergarten enrollment, a 26% drop in early childhood screenings, and a 30 to 35% drop in referrals to school districts through Help Me Grow. So we really see with this data from our early childhood department, we were seeing significant declines in all these areas. And as a researcher, if I link that programming issue or policy issue back to my brain research, that tells me a lot of kids were not getting services during that critical period of brain development. As Dr. Krish said, what we're seeing now is an uptick in services, in referrals, where some kids have waited and sat. I mean, I think we'll continue to see that trend continue. And are the systems really ready to take on sort of that tidal wave of kids coming through who've had delayed access to services? Next slide, Hyana. This slide, the writing is very small on this, but what I think is, I think about connecting the dots here, which is what we're going to do at MIDB, and pardon the acronym, Masonic Institute of the Developing Brain. We want to connect the dots between brain research, public health, equity and access issues, and then talk about policy and programming implications. Now, this here isn't necessarily research. This is what I'm hearing back from stakeholders in the field. This is what I'm hearing in general, that due to the COVID impacts, when districts were in virtual preschool, many general education preschool options were not required. So districts did close the programs, and some EC early childhood staff were let go because programs were closed. We're also hearing, this is sort of anecdotally through the grapevine, districts were reporting many staff who were let go found other work and were not available for rehire. So if we think of, we already have a workforce that we have significant shortages in, we already have issues of underpayment and access. Some of these individuals that we let go to a system that already has shortages may not come back. They may have found employment in other sectors that frankly pay better. Because the child count numbers, those are what I just shared with you, were low during the 2021 school year. Districts have let, again, another theme, let some of the early childhood special education staff go and will be understaffed. They're predicting understaffed based on the increased numbers they're seeing starting in June 2021. So we almost have a perfect storm here of challenges, that we have a large group of kids that were delayed for early intervention services, and now they're coming back, and some of the staff have either been laid off or have not come back. So we have more kids and fewer staff to accommodate those needs. One other arena that we have as a stakeholder group on the Minnesota Act Early team, we have several representatives from childcare. I want to be clear, this data was from this summer. So it has likely changed. Data is often a snapshot in time, and that's what this was. But what we saw from the Minnesota Child Care Survey this summer, I believe it was July, average child care enrollment was down about 40%. Childcare settings that we already have a shortage of. Jane and I were talking yesterday about childcare deserts around the state. 34% of them were not certain without additional public funds if they could reopen. They were considering closing permanently. And 64% of programs at that time had engaged in furlough, pay cuts, and layoffs. So again, we're connecting the dots in these systems. Less access to high quality early care, the less kids in the system, as Senator Smith said. This also has implications for our broader workforce. If there isn't childcare available, what are the implications for parents, families? What are the implications for moms? That often are the ones we already see a decline in the workforce in that sector. We need to think about all of these pieces. Next slide, please. So our key takeaways from our stakeholder group are the pandemic exposed existing vulnerabilities in the system. It amplified program and systems gaps that were already there, and we saw it exacerbated further. We predict that COVID-19, and I know we're not out of it yet, in this long and winding landscape of this pandemic, we're not done yet, but we do predict there will be impact on the early childhood system for years to come. As we think of policy, does it have to be that way? If we can intervene, what policy innovations can we have? Senator Smith was talking about that as I connect the dots across presentations. Do we have to have those impacts for year to come? We need to be prepared for a potential surge in children needing early intervention and preschool services, and proactive workforce capacity is needed in the early childhood sector. Absolutely. We already were short before the pandemic, and it only exacerbated it further in terms of early childhood workforce. Next slide. So as I keep saying, we are here at our institute, we want to connect brain development to public health, to policy issues. So a few additional pieces I want to share with you today in terms of data. Next slide. I'm just going to repeat it again. We know that 90% of the brain's capacity develops before the age of 5. We know that these are foundational points. High quality early education is one of the most critical factors in influencing children's development. Next slide. Yet a well-trained early childhood workforce, we know it is the foundation of successful early childhood education. Yet the workforce who serves our young children and families is too often undervalued and underpaid, and the pandemic has only added to these challenges. Next slide. I'm giving you a little national data here on the early childhood workforce challenges. In the US, we typically look at an annual shortage of about 60,000 teachers with increased shortages, and this is prior to the pandemic, in the field of early childhood special education. Minnesota has acknowledged a significant shortage of early childhood providers. And ECSE, early childhood special education, is an area of significant unmet need in the state. We also know that at least right now, we are growing. We have had a significant trend towards growing in the number of kids that we identify in early childhood special education, early intervention. And we also know that this population has become more diverse in terms of language, race, culture, as well as needs. It demands new skills and new knowledge to address those needs. So not only do we have a shortage, but we really need to innovate so that our early childhood workforce can match the needs of the kids coming through. And again, common theme throughout all of these early trends of the pandemic have really exacerbated these issues in terms of additional layoffs, turnover, and caregiver stress. Next slide. I am just going to summarize this. This is a project we proposed to look at the early childhood workforce. These were our hypotheses of what we were looking at and some of the challenges. Retirement age is an issue. College graduates going into programs, do we have enough? That pipeline, as we think about it, going in and getting education in this area? We are seeing increasing levels of burnout very much after and during this pandemic, and number of children needing supports is growing. We proposed this as a study, and we are still waiting for it to be funded, but we want to look more closely at this and really understand better the pandemic effects. Next slide, please. So I am going to quickly share just a little bit of data here. This was data provided by one of our partners, Comprehensive System for Professional Development. This is CSPD. They did a survey in the state with early childhood providers and teachers. They wanted to look at demographics. I think they had a sample of about 452 early childhood providers. And what we see, and I'm just going to summarize their data, that we have an aging workforce. If you look at this trend, it's skewing towards 41 and above. So we're looking at a significant number of retirements in the upcoming years. Next slide. This team, and it was led by Maren Christensen on the CSPD recruitment and retention team. The reason some of this surveyed group left the field, we're looking and seeing, I think none of this is a surprise: low wages, lack of professional growth opportunities, a significant number of retirements, and then issues such as respect and lack of time off, paid time off. Next slide. So as I wrap up here, one of our key questions in the next year to come on our Minnesota Act Early project is, how do we, as Senator Smith said, build back better? We want to support family resiliency, health, and wellness. We want to support resiliency in our early childhood systems. And we want to rely on our stakeholder teams to share what they're seeing and their insights into it. We know not everything from the pandemic was difficult. Well, a lot was difficult, maybe 95%, 99%, but we also know we learned some things. We learned some things about access and moving things virtually when we can, and how we can sort of triage and make systems a little more efficient. We have a lot more work to go on that. But one piece we're going to talk about a lot in terms of building family resilience, we know that resilience is not the absence of challenges, but how we respond. I think we have an opportunity, and I'm going to challenge all of us on this call to take what we've learned and how we've grown during this pandemic and move forward and really build back better, because our early childhood workforce really needs it. So thank you so much. Next slide. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm over here at the Masonic Institute of the Developing Brain, and I would love to get an email from you or have anyone come over and visit. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the next presenters.
Thank you, Jen. That was just excellent. And now we're going to move on to our last speaker on this particular theme of early intervention. And she is Amanda Varley, director of the state's preschool development grant. And we've welcomed Amanda before. We welcome her this morning to discuss more about this federally funded initiative and having a little bit of a deeper dive into how early intervention is happening in some of the hub projects. So Amanda, welcome, and take it away to our
Thanks,
audience.
Jane and all. So on the next slide, just as a really quick reminder of what the preschool development grant is is that it is a grant that, and you can go to the next slide, Hayana. It's a grant that aims to make it easier for children and families to get what they need to thrive. So it builds on the work of our early childhood systems reform and shares the same vision that when we focus on children who are facing racial, geographic, and economic inequities, all children will be able to thrive in their families and their communities. It's a partnership between education, health, human services, as well as a children's cabinet. And it's a $27 million grant over the course of 3 years. I also always like to say that the name of it is a bit of a misnomer because it has the word preschool in it when really it's about prenatal through age 5 and thinking about our early childhood comprehensive system. On the next slide, I always like to just show our guiding principles as a part of the grant. So we did a lot of community engagement in the in an initial planning grant in 2019 and heard some common themes around how hard it is for families to navigate our early childhood systems and get what they need, and rightfully grappled with both needing support with navigation, but also is the system too complicated in the first place. We also, of course, heard from families about challenges accessing employment, childcare, medical care, housing, transportation, and more, and heard about how we need to invest in community solutions. So all to say that undercurrents within those conversations with community members led to these guiding principles, that anything that we need to do must be trauma informed, must center racial equity, must be geographically responsive, and the rest of these. And so just wanting you to keep that in mind. On the next slide is a quick overview of like the high level work that we're doing on the grant. So after a couple of our presentations today, I would love to dive into some of the workforce stuff that we're also doing. But as far as grant activities, there are 4 primary buckets. One is exploring technology to coordinate eligibility and services. I'm seeing that typo now, of course. And so this is providing solutions that are both technology and legal solutions to make it easier for children and families to get what they need, whether that's a common application or looking into categorical eligibility or a referral form as a part of Help Me Connect. Another one is Help Me Connect, which is an online navigator that directly connects families and those who are working with families to programs and services in their area. Another of the main projects is community solutions. So investing in community solutions grants. So these are grants that are directly to BIPOC to organizations who are led by and serving BIPOC communities. And the idea is that those communities, we heard again and again, have solutions to the challenges that they're facing, and we should directly invest in them. And then what I want to dive into a little bit deeper today is our local cross-agency hubs. And so on the next slide, it shows how there's a map of where our community resource hubs are. There's 12 hubs in the state. And to be very clear, these are pilots. And so they do not have statewide reach in the preschool development grant. So this is a pilot program. There are 12 community resource hubs. And then we have one collaborative partner that has separate funding, but participates in our professional development. And there are 3 goals of the hubs: to make it easier for children and families to get what they need. So these are those human navigators that help connect children and families. We also want to make sure that we're increasing access to services. And so they're using tools like Help Me Connect, which I mentioned, as well as Bridge to Benefits, to ensure children and families have ways to access the services in which that they're seeking. And then we also wanted to be able to build community engagement and to support those community developed solutions. And so to do this, a few things are happening. All hubs have access to infant and early childhood mental health consultation. We're also, of course, ensuring training on both Help Me Connect and Bridge to Benefits. The hubs also participate in communities of practice, both to build strength among the hubs themselves and within the individual hubs and their community partners, but also to build in a feedback loop to the state about what's working and what's not working. So we can really be thinking about our policies and practices and how how to improve to make it easier for hubs to operate as well. So, and then we'll also have an overall evaluation of the hubs, and we're doing our principle with how we do evaluation at the state is for the preschool development grant really is how we're doing it in a way to build community capacity. So for the next part of the presentation, I want to dive into two specific hubs that kind of follow this theme today of screening and early intervention. So one is Sawtooth Mountain Clinic, which is up in Grand Marais. And so this first year of their funding, they've done two primary goals. So one is that they've been able to reflect and build capacity. And so they created a needs assessment with Wilder Research to really look at a systems level of their needs in their region. And I also just want to reflect on the incredible partnerships that Sawtooth has been able to build, from their school district to their county public health to human services. I'll talk a little bit more about their partnership with Grand Portage, childcare providers, a nature play school, the YMCA, libraries, but really thinking about building partnerships to meet the holistic needs of children and families in their community. So on the next slide, more specific to screening and early intervention, is they have been able to devote staff to be looking at their screening and early intervention process and really analyzing how they can think about it differently from a systems perspective. So one example of something that they've been able to implement is improving how they share screening forms between the clinic and community-based organizations, which I want to say sounds simple, and these data sharings between organizations keeps coming up as just a really foundational challenge. And so they've been having parents fill out a universal release form so they can reduce paperwork and making sure that they have coordination of screening between different systems. It sounds small, but it is just an incredibly, it's a big feat. So, and then they're also reviewing the referral process and how navigators can track progress and ensure that there's family follow-up and that closed loop referrals. Next slide, just a little bit about their partnership between Grand Portage and Sawtooth Mountain Clinic. They have been able to, they have two doctors who visit weekly to Grand Portage for wellness checks. They've also been using their funding with the hubs to increase awareness of programs that are available to tribal members up in Grand Portage. And then they've been really strengthening their relationships between Sawtooth and Grand Portage. And for example, Grand Portage has been without a childcare program for 2 years. And so Sawtooth is seeing how they can step in and also support Grand Portage in that work as well. I also want to highlight Fraser on the next slide. So Fraser has been able to work closer with pediatric clinics in the metro area to create real-time warm handoffs for families. They've also been able to connect families who are facing barriers and getting to that next step in whatever they're seeking. And they've been able to build a team of navigators who have specialty in early childhood mental health, and also build up a Spanish-speaking team as well. On the next slide, with having the Spanish-speaking staff, it's actually helped Fraser build bridges with the Spanish-speaking community, and able to build that established trust in a culturally appropriate way. They've really appreciated having access to Help Me Connect as well as Bridge to Benefits to have more ways to assist families. And then they've been able to increase outreach for families and ensure that there's that, again, that loop, the loop back and closed loop feedback to include pediatricians in how they're able to support families in receiving services. So that's just, I went through that really quickly for time, but I just want to say that each hub, generally each hub is focusing on the needs within their specific communities. And I called out these two based on the topics of today. No two hubs are the same. And we have just been really humbled to learn from each of them and how we can support these more local collaborations to help families get what they need. So, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions you have when we get to the question and answer section. So yeah, and of course, go to our website to learn more. We have a mid-grant report that just came out that gives a status update of everything that we're doing to date across a number of projects, including workforce has come up a couple times today. So we have some updates on some work that we're doing there as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jane.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's, again, I'm just in awe of all the work that's going on. And we've got, now I think we're on a course to get us back to federal legislation. Just again, a reminder, you will be sent a link to this recorded session. So things that missed, we will, hopefully you'll be able to pick up. So Deb Fitzpatrick, Children's Defense Fund, just can't say enough to thank you for your work and support for all of these efforts. And you're about to take us on a bit of a tour of what's happening federally. So with that, I turn the podium over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks everybody for having me this morning. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, if you could go to the first slide, please. Kind of one of the things we've heard, polling nationally shows that only 10% of people understand what is actually in the Build Back Better package, which, there's been a lot of media attention about the, overall price tag. Is it 3 trillion? Is it 2 trillion? There's been a lot of conversation about kind of negotiations between different wings of the Democratic Party, but much less on what's actually in this amazing once in a generation package. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about that. Also, some of you may have seen in the media, yesterday was a big day for negotiations in Washington, as Senator Smith alluded to. President Biden has ramped up his efforts to kind of bring the different factions in his party together to kind of work through bringing this package to landing, as Senator Smith said. And part of that is some negotiations around how the costs might be scaled down. So I'll talk about that a little bit as we walk through these pieces. But again, given our conversation in the group we're with today, wanted to really focus on what's in this package for babies, toddlers, and parents. Next slide, please. So Senator Smith talked a lot about childcare, so we'll start there, but there is a lot more in this package. Our understanding is that, so the package, so first of all, just from a process standpoint, the president proposed a package, the House moved a package through their budget process through reconciliation. And I'm going to talk about first what passed the House and in their Ways and Means Committee. This is the final kind of version. It's not been voted on by the full House yet, but it's sitting there awaiting negotiations with the Senate. So in this package that passed the House, there is a $450 billion new investment in early childhood care and education. And that investment comes in two big pieces, the Child Care for American Families program and then universal pre-K. And then there's a smaller group of funding of $25 billion that's included for childcare facilities, and that's included in a different bill, in the infrastructure bill that's also moving in DC. Next slide, please. So the Child Care for American Families Act as proposed by the Biden administration, would allow children and families earning 1.5 times the median income in their state. So this is not poverty. We often talk about 200% of poverty, et cetera. This is 1.5 times the median income in their state. Minnesota's median household income is $84,000 for families with children. So when you think about that, this moves this support well into the middle class. As Senator Smith mentioned, the idea is this program would create an entitlement that no family would pay more than 7% of their income for childcare. And the lowest income families up to, I believe the House package had it up to 95% of that median income would receive childcare for free. This program is also designed to be inclusive of children with disabilities. We've heard a lot from the prior speakers today about how that need is increasing and also how that is a huge part of a group of children that are underserved by our current childcare system. And then, finally, this would fund provider payments based on cost of quality, which we know involves paying teachers, the educators and caregivers in these settings adequately. In this proposal, it is basically creating parity with kindergarten teachers. So a lot there. Our understanding, talking to federal lobbyists in Washington right now, is that as these negotiations have proceeded and the different proposals have been put on the table to bring the cost of this package down from 3.5 trillion to around 2 trillion, is that this childcare entitlement is still on the table and part of that proposal that is being advanced. I want to be very, very clear. Nothing is set in stone. And this is the key week where some of these final decisions about the framework of what will be included and at what levels will be decided. So at this point, good news on the childcare front. Looks like this piece is still on the table in its full form. Next slide, please. So there is also a second stream of funding that would create a universal pre-K entitlement. And this again would be a state-federal partnership. I should go back to say that the child care proposals that I just mentioned, the American Child Care for American Families Act, does also allow a fair amount of does require a fair amount of the state to kind of make the system work. So it is also a state-federal partnership. This universal pre-K partnership, again, is a state-federal one. It would make childcare or universal pre-K 3- and 4-year-olds free for all families. Again, designed to be an inclusive program, increase wages, be funded at a high quality level. Lots of, concern, I think, that we want to make sure that both of these pieces are moving ahead together and that both of the pieces allow for mixed delivery. That means that all different kinds of settings, families like to choose different kinds of settings, whether it's a family childcare provider, a center-based provider, a school district, a Head Start program, that all of those would be included in these systems. Next slide, please. So again, that universal pre-K piece is also still on the table in the $2 trillion kind of negotiations that are happening right now. The next piece of the package, so moving on from childcare, the next piece of the package that I think is really important and for our families is paid family and medical leave. The version that passed the House in the Ways and Means Committee would provide 12 weeks of partial wage replacement per year for basically FMLA reasons, including arrival of a new child. But also, I've mentioned this in this forum before, the #1 use of medical leave in state programs, paid family medical leave programs, is actually related to pregnancy. So really important also as we think about the prenatal to 3 area. Also important that the program that passed the House the House Ways and Means Committee would have a progressive wage replacement scheme that would pay out higher levels of wage replacement for our lowest income families and an expansive definition of family member. Next slide, please. So the not so great news is that the proposal that's been floated that's kind of making some progress at the federal level again to bring the costs down for this total package would reduce the level of the number of weeks of paid family and medical leave to about 4 weeks. So again, that's not ideal. We know that, even the 12 weeks for bonding leave for a new child is well below international standards. But so I just wanted to point out that this is one of the concessions that's being seriously discussed at this point. The other elements of this, it's a little unclear from the media portrayals yet, since these discussions just took place yesterday, whether some of these other elements around family definition and wage replacement levels would remain intact for those 4 weeks. So we'll be monitoring that. Next slide, please. Also wanted to talk about the child tax credit. Senator Smith mentioned that a little bit. The proposal that passed the House Ways and Means Committee would continue the increased boost cash benefit up to $3,600 for kids 0 to 5 through 2025. It would also restore eligibility for children who aren't eligible for a Social Security number. Those are kids that would be eligible through an ITINs. It would continue the eligibility for 17-year-olds. And most importantly, I think in terms of the poverty reducing benefits of this particular policy, it would extend the full refundability of the credit that would make that permanent. And that's really the important part in terms of our lowest income or no income families being able to receive this benefit. Prior to the ARPA changes, that this would extend 322,000 of our lowest income families and our kids in Minnesota did not receive the full credit. So they actually received less than kids from families with more income. This is also the important element for allowing monthly payments to families, which have also been really important. Next slide, please. So the proposal that's been floated and again, being advanced in the media from yesterday's negotiations would bring that extension of the boosted total cash benefit down, would only extend that for 1 year instead of 5. So it would extend it through the 2021 year. Our understanding is that the permanent extension of full refundability is also part of that package. So that is important, or part of the proposal that's being debated now, again, to bring those costs down. We're not sure yet about some of these other elements, but obviously this has been a really important tool for bringing down child poverty in the state of Minnesota. It's estimated that it's bringing child poverty down by 48% for kids overall, but 55% for Black families in the state. So it's really an important racial equity tool. Next slide, please. So then also another area that's been getting very little media attention and may be really important for a number of folks in this community is the healthcare elements. So I just wanted to mention that Minnesota did vote legislature, thanks Senate Representative Pinto, to expand coverage postpartum for Medicaid for 12 months postpartum. In the ARP proposal that was extended that was made available to states for 5 years. The proposal, again, that's on the table as part of Build Back Better and the House Reconciliation Package would expand that permanently. So that's an important development. Also, there's some elements, some investments to grow and diversify the prenatal workforce and to do education and anti-bias training. And then also in the House Ways and Means proposal would require states to offer CHIP 12 months continuous coverage and for both Medicaid and CHIP, and to make that funding permanent. Right now, it has to be reauthorized regularly. And it allows states to increase the upper income income eligibility.
All right, so next slide, please. So Senator Smith suggested that it would be really important for people in this community to reach out to members of Congress and to share input on how important the elements of this package are. These are just 2 tools. And again, I think this will be made available to folks, these links, but these are 2 tools. You can go into these tools and craft your own message. It pre-populates a message to members of your members of Congress. But you can, change those to highlight the things that you think are important based on what was shared today and other priorities you might have for the Build Back Better reconciliation process. So I'll stop there and be available for questions.
Okay. Hello, thank you. And thank you, Deb. We are just, we're in the back room here saying, my gosh, we're running late on time again, but we really, really, really thank you for this. And I just, I'm going to call on Laura LaCroix de Lune, and we'll have just a couple of things to tell you that we have received Q&A, and what we're doing our best is to have panelists type in their answers, since we won't have a lot of time for Q&A, but we will pursue answers to what you send in. And so with that, we welcome Laura LaCroix de Lune. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and move it to the next slide? I will, and then you can go to the next slide right away. I will talk fast. It is recorded. You will get the slides. And so we can try to cover as much ground as possible. As Deb mentioned, the Minnesota legislature did extend the postpartum benefits from 60 days to 12 months. This will begin July 1st of 2022. This is critically important because 24% of pregnancy-related deaths occur in the days between 45 days after birth up to 365 days after birth. And we know also in Minnesota that approximately 20% of women are determined ineligible after the 60 days. So that's about 1,145 women each month. So this will make a huge impact by extending it to 12 months. Currently, right now, the public health emergency is still in place at the federal level. And so if somebody is receiving medical assistance benefits, they cannot be removed from the rolls. So please help get the word out. One of the benefits of this extension is that it'll align the pregnancy coverage with the auto newborn coverage. And so both parent and child will be up for renewal at the same time. Next slide. We also saw some really exciting provisions to help protect pregnant and lactating workers. These workplace protections will go into effect January 2022. These new provisions require lactating individuals who are expressing milk to be provided a separate space to do this and to be paid for these breaks. They also added provisions to allow for more frequent restroom breaks or water breaks, to sit from time to time, and to limit up to 20 pounds of lifting during a pregnancy, all without a doctor's notes. Prior to, currently, up until January, these are, your employer can require these. So these additional protections will help people so that they don't have to always bring in a doctor's note. And this impacts all employers with 15 or more employees. So next slide. There were a number of different perinatal health and perinatal health equity bills that passed in the 21 legislative session. The Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act, which we've talked about here in previous forums. Funding for that is going through Dr. Rachel Hardiman at the University of Minnesota. Her team is leading the development of an implicit bias curriculum that will be made available to labor and delivery staff throughout the state of Minnesota, and training for professionals and paraprofessionals to address implicit biases and impact health inequities for Black and Indigenous pregnant individuals and families. We also want to share that the support for healthy development of babies was made available to the African American Babies Coalition at Wilder. And this focus, what they are using these resources for is training, education, and capacity building, and really focusing again on our Black and Indigenous pregnant individuals, specifically because we have such large disparities and persistent disparities among the Black and Indigenous communities in Minnesota. Another important bill that passed was the expansion of the integrated care for high-risk pregnancies. This expansion is actually going to build off of one of the African-American ITRIP coalitions, and they are addressing low birth weight and maternal health outcomes, and really trying to provide both this, pay attention to both the health outcomes and the social determinants of health in this work, and increasing access to community health workers, doulas, and care navigators in their work with individuals during the perinatal health period, which is during the pregnancy and then postpartum. So next slide. Family home visiting, they saw an increase in the funding that was made available, and it was put into statute. 25% of the funds can now be used for evidence-informed and promising practice programs. It is expected that an RFP, a smaller RFP, will be made available this fall. So watch for that if you're providing home visiting services or interested in this resources. It'll be released through the Department of Health Family Home Visiting section. And then a larger RFP will be made available in the spring of 2022. The goal is to provide 5-year grants so that people can have long-term funding. The evidence-informed and promising practice programs, they may have a 3-year grant attached to that. They're still making those final decisions, but 3 to 5 years is the timeline that they're talking about. They will be separate RFPs with the intent to keep the competition among them separate. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Hyanna. The Healthy Start Act, they are currently in the process, Department of Corrections is in the process of planning this, and with an implementation date of January 1st, 2022. The purpose is to provide pregnant and postpartum individuals time to move into community-based alternative settings, to be with their children. The other benefit of this is that they are serving their time concurrently in these community alternative settings, as well as they will be eligible again for medical assistance, because when you are in prison, you are removed from those roles. So there's a lot of really good things that will happen as a result of this. I know we are running short on time, so I will just quickly highlight the Family Friend and Neighbor Care RFP is out. It is due November 12th. And I do want to make another connection. If people are interested in providing home visiting services to Family and Friend and Neighbor Care, it is an allowable expense that you just have to dig through the allowable purposes for this RFP. And they're also hiring a project manager. Next slide. And then I will, I know we are short on time, so there are a whole number of childcare policies and programs that were put into place, as well as studies. I do want to highlight the permanent childcare assistance rate increases will go into effect in November 1st. So we're moving up to the 40th percentile for infants and toddlers, the 30th percentile for all other children, and the legally non-licensed providers are moving up to the 90th percentile of the family childcare rate. And then the stabilization grants are available now through the end of the 2023. And with the primary purpose of this is to try to help address wages. I know there were a number of questions in the Q&A about compensation and that being a challenge for other people or for providers. I will just end on this slide. I feel like I'm rushing. One last slide on funds for childcare. So there's a number of different important resources being made available, both through DEED. The Minnesota Initiative Foundations also have access to childcare grants. The Great Start Task Force is they're finalizing selections for the task force members. And this is an opportunity to explore business model and financing strategies to really help make sure that families, all families who have children birth to 5 have access to high quality care. And then I will finally say that the extension for pre-K slots have been made available for the next 2 years. And so families can access those resources as well. Okay, deep breath. I think I flew through those slides fast enough.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, audience, for being with us on this. We are handling Q&A through typed answers from our panelists. So you will get to see them in the recording if you haven't gotten a chance to kind of scan them now. And at this point, I just want to thank all of our presenters, thank all of you in the audience, thank Senator Smith, and turn our final couple of minutes over to Representative Dave Pinto. So with that, we bid you adieu and look for you in January on the 20th.
Jane and all, thanks so much. There is a lot going on, and I'm hoping that fellow panelists are looking at the questions in the chat and answering them. I'm actually going to answer one right now in my closing remarks, which is a question that was just posted asking about how we're going to continue to support early care and learning after the stabilization grants are done. I want to emphasize to folks, as we discussed in July, that our state budget had a lot of work in this area, and you heard a lot from Laura LaCroix-DeLune's presentation just now about a lot of exciting steps that were taken. I'm hopeful that the steps that we took this spring are going to set us up for longer term success in the future. The stabilization grants that were referenced are these monthly payments going out to early care and learning providers. They are scheduled to last through the next 2 years. And what happens in 2 years, we get a new state budget. And I hope that that'll be a state budget that will reflect the kind of higher expectations that we all now have, that there needs to be public support in that area and early childhood more broadly. And wouldn't it be amazing and be terrific if we could have strong federal support as we're doing that, per the comments from Senator Smith. So the basic answer to that question is sort of how are we going to continue to provide support in this critical area is that we need to continue advocating and working together. And I know that the folks on this forum will definitely do that. I want to apologize for the absence of my co-host, Representative Lisa Damath, who wasn't able to join us this morning. But I've been pleased to work with her, with the elders for infants, and with the University of St. Thomas on these issues. We are really bummed that we've continued to have these only 90-minute online presentations instead of the 3 hours in person that we've had in the past. I want to encourage everybody who's watching this to please keep an eye out. And when the time comes that we can be back together in person, to please join us. We often say that the networking and the breaks are the most important parts of these events because they're a chance for all of us to be engaging with one another in person. But in the meantime, we will have this virtual substitute. So please reach out to me and to our presenters with questions and otherwise. Let's continue to work together to give every young child in Minnesota the terrific start that they deserve. So many thanks. I'm wrapping up right now, and I'm, as I say, just keeping an eye on the Q&A. And for those whose questions did not end up getting answered, please reach out to us, and we'll try to get you an answer for that as well. And yes, a reminder. Actually, good point. A couple of dates coming up in addition to the next forum on the morning of Thursday, January 20th. I also want to note that there's a second season of the Early Risers podcast from Minnesota Public Radio. We want to keep an eye out for folks for that. We'll send a link to that. And then the next forum, again, coming up on January 20th, and a lot of other opportunities as well. And if folks have events or other things that they'd like us to spread the word about to our, I think, now more than 1,000-person list, please reach out to us as well with that. So many thanks to University of St. Thomas and Elders for Infants, and to all of you for joining us. And with that, I think that our forum is now concluded. Thanks so much.